Hi, everybody. Dan Illman, Mike Beer for Breeders' Cup Prep Recap. And in this edition, we're going to take a look back at the phenomenal Flight Lines Pacific Classic. A scintillating effort, to be sure, at Del Mar, going a mile and a quarter. Let's take a look at this race. Let's take a look at Flightline. And there really isn't much to say to the folks except enjoy the performance, Mike.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, if nothing else, aside from what we wind up watching here as this race goes on, this is the first time this horse had stretched out in distance. I guess most of us were waiting to see if he would be as good, going 2 turns and 10 furlongs. And guess what? He's as good.
The Flightline and Flavien Prat, the number 5 on the outside, passing the stands for the first time. And I guess I can understand what Mr. Mandela was thinking. He's going to send one of the long shots extra hope up to push him early, maybe to set things up for his more heralded uncoupled stablemate Royal Ship. On paper, it looks like they're going at a pretty good pace. On visuals, it looks like Flightline's coasting.
Yeah, the fractions look fast, but it's a relatively tight pack here for the first half mile, which makes you think they're not really going that fast. And of course, the fact that Flightline's under a double arm bar here also makes you feel like they're not going that fast. At this point, he's just going to take over, Dan, because there's no reason not to do that. And he'll just keep getting further away from these horses. I get that it's not, some kind of stellar field, and we can talk about the horse that eventually winds up running second in a minute, Dan. It's kind of amazing how easily he did this, and then what the final time came back.
Blink of an eye, he opens up 8 lengths on this field. You're going to see Country Grammar, the winner of the Dubai World Cup, eventually move into second. But right now, they all have a lot of work to do, and they're going to have even more work to do because Flightline is going to continue to pour it on. 3/4 of a mile and 1:09 and 4. He's going to cruise under the wire. A mile and a quarter, 1:59.28, a Beyer's speed figure of 1:26. And Mike, after this race, folks are not only talking about Flightline as the best horse in the country, he most certainly is. As one of the best horses in the world, he might very well be the best horse in the world, but people are starting to compare him now to some of the all-time greats. And is that premature?
Well, listen, the game has changed so much that I guess you can't really, do that anymore. Greatness, of course, Dan, is proven on the racetrack, and this horse is only going to make 6 career starts. It seems like, to me, it's not enough time. But, listen, he certainly looked very good in all of his races so far. I mean, when you pull up his PPs and look at them, it's not just that he's winning, Dan, and he's winning in fast time. Every race is an absolute blowout, and he's won some, pretty major races, at least in his last 3 starts. I don't know. He's obviously very good, but it's just a real shame that you're not going to really get to find out, how good he actually is, or how good he actually could be, because they just don't race him enough.
He's run 5 times. He's won by a combined, my math isn't so great, 62 3/4 lengths. He's won at 3/4. He's won at 7/8. He's won at a 1-turn mile. Of course, the big question going into the Peak Classic was the mile and a quarter. He answered that certainly in the affirmative. He is going to be the prohibitive favorite in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Is he beatable?
Of course, and any horse is beatable. It's not going to be easy for anyone to beat this horse, though. Obviously, the distance question has been erased. They're going to ship him again now. He's already shipped and shown that he can do that and still run a very fast and very strong race. And he's just, way the horse to beat in the Classic. That's not a surprise to anyone. It doesn't mean that it's impossible to beat him, but it's certainly going to be very tough.
And this wasn't the greatest Pacific Classic field in the world behind Flightline. I mean, again, Country Grammar did have some credentials. He was a horse that loved a mile and a quarter, and he did win the big race in Dubai. It's unlikely, I would think, that he's going to face off with Flightline again in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Your horses like Royal Ship and Express Train, they're good Southern California handicap horses, but horses that, if they did happen to run in the Breeders' Cup, would be giant prices.
Yeah, well, it's hard to, want any of the ones that we just watched him beat there. Your Country Grammar was the one horse, so I feel like he's the good reference point, though, if nothing else, Dan, because, he's not a superstar, but he's the kind of horse who every year, most years anyway, would probably turn up in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and you go, yeah, he likes a mile and a quarter. He's got a shot. He runs, those speed figures in the, low to mid 100s, somewhere between 100 and 110. And you feel like, most years he's a real contender going into the Breeders' Cup, at least for a major prize, a major placing in that kind of a race. And he just got beat 20 lengths by this horse.
In the Breeders' Cup Classic, it's apparent that Flightline, as we take a peek at him, trained by John Sadler, Flavien Prat aboard, he is a son of the great stallion Tappet. He would appear to have to deal with another major speed, and that is Life is Good, himself one of the better handicap horses in the country, probably the most quality and fastest horse he's faced to date from a pace standpoint.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. The Life is Good probably is the best horse that Flightline will have run against, assuming they both make it to the Breeders' Cup Classic, as they should. And so we'll see how it plays out. Obviously, Life is Good has been the 1.25 miles once, and to say it wasn't his best performance, I think might be a little bit of an understatement. I personally didn't think it was terrible, but it certainly wasn't his best performance. We'll see if he can, show up and run a lot better at the Breeders' Cup, because he is a horse who very talented in his own right, very fast. He will be in front of Flightline early in that Breeders' Cup, and then we'll see what happens from there.
Let's take a look at the prices for the Pacific Classic. No surprise that Flightline was hammered in the wagering. He returned a paltry 260. Country Grammar way behind, ends up getting second to complete the exacta. Flightline dominant in the Pacific Classic. He is going to be the marquee name of the two-day Breeders' Cup meeting at Keeneland, and he is going to be very, very tough to down in the Classic.